Right, absolutely a triumphant moment for the president that he was able to get this big bill over the finish line. You know, this time last week, we weren't sure if he was going to get enough Republican support to do this. You know, take in the Senate, for example, on Tuesday, that vote was 50 to 50. It had to be broken by the Vice President, J.D. Vance. And then it moved to the House, and there was drama there as well. Wednesday night, it didn't appear they had the votes, and they had to keep a preliminary vote open all night. We were there watching the screen, seeing when they were going to get there. So this right here is a big moment that they were able to get it done. And now it looks like he's about to sign his signature.
All right, let's go ahead and listen back in.
President, this is the gavel we use to enact the big, beautiful bill, and I want you to have that for your
Are we ready?
We're ready.
Are you ready? Good. Have a good time.
And there you have it. The president signs his so-called big and beautiful bill. It is now officially law on July 4th. His self-imposed deadline for the finished legislation, again, it is now law. Let's go ahead and bring Evan Koslof from Washington, D.C. back into the mix here. Evan, what exactly is in this bill?
Well, you heard President Trump talking about many aspects, and that's because this is a sprawling piece of legislation. It's helpful to think of this as really being in three buckets. There are the tax cuts, the spending cuts, and the boosts in spending. So why don't we break them down, starting with taxes, because that is such a big element of this deal. $4.5 trillion worth of tax cuts are included in this mega bill, among them extending the 2017 Trump tax cuts. Also, on top of that, we have the eliminating federal taxes on tips and overtime pay for many workers. Then let's move on to that second bucket, the spending increases. We have hundreds of billions of dollars that are going towards border enforcement and hundreds of billions more for national defense. That includes for the Golden Dome, you heard him mentioning there, the missile protection system. Then finally, there's the third bucket, spending cuts, and that includes major cuts to social safety net programs. Among them, we have the food assistance program, SNAP. We also have big changes to Medicaid. You've probably heard a lot about that all week, where there are going to be new work requirements that will lead to millions losing health insurance, according to estimates from the Congressional Budget Office. Also phases out many clean energy credits. So a big bill right here. And it has a big hefty price tag as well. It's estimated to add to the deficit some $3.3 trillion over the next decade. So Sharon, there's going to be a lot to talk about because this was a big bill that's going to change a lot of aspects of American life.
It really will. A lot of lawmakers in our states will be very busy with this as well. So, Evan, Democrats have been united in opposing this bill. How are they responding, and what is their plan moving forward?
Right, so there has been a big battle over framing of this bill. Republicans talking about this as an engine for economic growth, these tax cuts being really helpful. But Democrats, meanwhile, framing it totally different, right? They're saying that these are tax cuts for the rich paid for by cutting programs that mostly help the poor. So that's the dichotomy that they're really focusing on. The reality is this, though. Democrats are the opposition. They don't have control on Capitol Hill. They don't have control at the White House. So their main power right now is just to talk a lot in the public square and try to change public opinion on this. I think that's why Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries did what he did on Thursday, where he took to the House floor to talk and did not stop talking for 8 hours and 44 minutes. It was a new House record. I believe we have a snippet of what he had to say if we want to listen into that.
I'm going to take my time and ensure that the American people fully understand how damaging this bill will be to their quality of life. This reckless Republican budget is an immoral document.
So again, that was a small snippet. He went for 8 hours and 44 minutes. So there was a lot to take from there. But clearly, Sharon, Democrats think that this is a winning message, so we are probably going to hear a lot of talk about this bill over the next 16 months or so as we head into the all-important midterms.
Absolutely. And Evan, this bill means deep cuts to Medicaid and food assistance. This is glaring for a lot of Americans. As you mentioned, 11+ million could lose health insurance and 3+ million lose food assistance known as SNAP. So the question many Americans have is when and how will it be determined who will get cut from those programs? What do we know about that?
Right, and this is when it's so important to pay attention to the exact details. So I did take some notes here to talk about it. So it's all about work requirements to start if we're going to talk about Medicaid. It's a new 80-hour per month work requirement that could include volunteering, and it's going to apply to able-bodied adults under 65 without dependents. So those are the people that are now going to face this work requirement, and it kicks into effect in 2026. Let's move on to SNAP now, where it's slightly different. There's another work requirement. It expands it. It used to be capped at adults under 55. Now it's adults under 65. And on top of that, it also applies to parents if their kids are over 6 years old. So it's an expanding amount of people that must work to get those benefits. That is going to kick in early next year. One more change to talk about when it comes to SNAP, that states are going to shoulder more of the cost now. That is not going to start until 2028. Sharon, that's notable because some of these more controversial policies are not going to kick in until after those midterms.
Okay, so the timeline is very important to note. I know some people are saying this is happening tomorrow, so that's something we'll definitely continue to follow closely. So, Evan, what are the politics of this bill and how will it be perceived come election time?
That is a really important question. I mean, we get a glimpse by taking a look at some of the polling. If you look right now, the majority do oppose the bill overall. I can name a couple of those polls. For example, Quinnipiac found that 55% of Americans oppose. Fox News found 59% oppose. But these are just preliminary framing of the bill. It's based on basically what lawmakers are saying about all of this. Quick anecdote. I was speaking with a friend yesterday. He's busy. He's got a demanding job. He's got a baby. He's not exactly watching politics every day. He's not tuning into the news every night. But he is a Democrat. And he said to me, I hear this bill is bad. He doesn't know anything about the bill, but he hears it's bad. And so I think that out of the gate, what we might see is a lot of people basically identifying with their party. So Democrats saying, I hear from my lawmakers that it's bad. Republicans hearing that it's great. The bigger question, Sharon, is I think down the road, once we get past the framing of this, what are the actual tangible impacts that people will feel? Is it going to be that they look at their taxes and or their paycheck and they say, look, I didn't get taxed on my overtime. This is great. Or will it be a loved one that loses access to SNAP or Medicaid? We really don't know which issues are going to resonate the most. Only time will tell. And politically, that's, I think, what's going to be most important, what people feel, not just the framing.
Right, time will tell. I mean, a lot of waiters, waitresses, they're saying, hey, great, no taxes on my tips. But really, there's always that fine print that we need to try to figure out what does that really mean? How long is that going to last and when does it take effect? So, Evan, immigration policy, it's always been a main focus for President Trump. What does the bill do in particular on that front? And how has the president softened his tone on unauthorized farm workers in the recent days?
Right, this is interesting. This is arguably his biggest topic. The economy and immigration have always been his two, but arguably immigration is what he talks about the most. And this bill does funnel a lot of money towards immigration policy and border security. If I could just name a couple of them, $46.5 billion towards the border wall expenses, $45 billion for detention facilities, $29.9 billion, it's almost $30 billion bucks for immigration personnel like ICE officers and agents. So it's sending a lot of money as he continues his plans for deporting migrants that are in the country illegally. But like you mentioned, at a rally on Thursday, he did mention how farm workers could lose access if there are mass migration efforts or deportation efforts, because an estimated 40% or so of farm workers are estimated to be in the country illegally. And so that could be a big deal if there are a lot of these workers that are deported. And that's why it was interesting that on stage he mentioned that there could be some sort of arrangement where these farmers can vouch for the farm workers that are in the country illegally and allow them to stay. That's a real change from what we heard on the campaign trail. So I think it's looking at the reality that these farmers really do rely on this labor because it's such a big portion. Sharon, I was just on a reporting trip in North Michigan where I was speaking with a number of farmers, and they were clear. Issue 1, 2, and 3, it's labor. Labor is like the big issue for a lot of farmers. It's hard to get enough of it. It's hard to find the workers. When they do find them, they're often expensive. It's difficult to pay them. And so I think that is part of this. The president is aware that if there were some mass deportation effort where all these farm workers were sent out of the country, there would be impacts felt on farms.
Evan, as we know, the Democrats vehemently opposed this bill, but leading up to yesterday's votes, the president spoke one-on-one with Republicans who opposed his bill. However, as we know, not all Republicans voted yes. So who and what was their biggest opposition to the bill?
Well, it's like the two different sides, essentially. There were those that were worried about the deficit, because remember, at the end of the day here, when you put all this together, you take away the taxes, you take away the spending cuts, add the increased money, you're looking at what the deficit is, and then the CBO estimates that it's at $3.3 trillion that is going to be added to the deficit over 10 years. So there were fiscal conservatives that were looking at this bill. There are many things that they, of course, liked in it, but they were worried about adding to the deficit because we do have such a tremendous debt here in the U.S. So that was one side of the equation. The other were the moderates, the centrists, that were worried about some of those cuts to programs like Medicaid, programs like SNAP, and they didn't want to lose those programs. And so that's why the path to getting here, to get enough cuts that we're going to make the fiscal hawks happy, but not going too far where you lose those centrists, it was a difficult balancing act for the Republican leadership, and yet they were able to pull it off here. And I think that does play into one thing that I find very interesting here, Sharon, which is just that the president seems to have complete and total control over his party. You compare that to his first term, where there were people actively sort of going in a different direction, whether it was within the administration or on Capitol Hill. At this point, President Trump has just complete control over his party. He was able to whip these members to support this piece of legislation despite their concerns.
Again, President Donald Trump signing into law what he calls a big, beautiful bill, the mega bill, the biggest yet in the history of our country. He spoke earlier. Let's go ahead and listen to what he had to say.
And it includes the largest tax cut in American history, the largest spending cut, $1.7 trillion, and yet you won't even notice it. Just waste, fraud, and abuse in American history. So you have the biggest tax cut, the biggest spending cut, the largest border security investment in American history. We want to have strong borders.
All right, again, the president speaking about signing this bill into law. Evan, break down again for us real quick, what is in this bill? For the everyday person who's just joining us saying, wait, what does this mean? What does this mean for me?
Right. For those of you that are just joining us to talk about this, it's easy to look at this as sort of three buckets, where it's about the spending cuts, the spending increases, and then the tax cuts. That's a really big part of this bill. So let's start with the taxes, where we're looking at about $4.5 trillion worth of tax cuts. That includes the extending of the Trump tax cuts from 2017 in his first term, and also other provisions like eliminating taxes on tips and overtime pay for many workers. So that's bucket one. Bucket number two would be those spending increases, hundreds of billions of dollars for the border, hundreds of billions of dollars for national defense. That includes money for the Golden Dome, the missile protection system. And then finally, bucket number three, which is the spending cuts. And this is what raised alarm for many Democrats, as we've been talking about. They included cuts to big social safety net programs like SNAP, the food assistance program. And then the big one was to Medicaid. There were big new work requirements that are estimated to lead to millions of people losing their health insurance over the next decade or so. Also phasing out many clean energy credits. This bill was massive, so there's a lot to get to. And then the big number there on the bottom of your screen, you're probably seeing it there. All of this estimated to add some $3.3 trillion over the next decade to the deficit. So Sharon, so much to this bill, it's going to have wide-ranging impacts.
All right, and the Democrats, how were they moving forward from this, as they were very much opposed to this bill?
Right, I think that they're going to keep clamoring and talking about this bill until polling starts to flip. For now, polling, as we talked about, shows that this is something that the majority of Americans do not support, not by large margins, but the majority do not support it. So we can expect them to keep talking about it, just like Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries did when he was on the House floor and spent a whopping 8 hours, 44 minutes talking about it and blasting the bill. It's a sign that this is something they are very comfortable talking about, Sharon.
All right, Evan Koslof, I thank you for your time. Again, President Donald Trump signing into law the $4.5 trillion tax breaks and $1.2 trillion in cuts to government programs bill. We'll have much more on this throughout the days.